There's something about nights like these, rain-soaked, unending, with every inch of sky blanketed in thick, low-hanging clouds. Nights where the world seems smaller, quieter, where all the usual sounds fade beneath the steady drum of rain against glass. On nights like this, the silence feels different. There's a weight to it, something that hangs in the air, pressing down on you, urging you to listen just in case there's something you're missing. Before I go deeper into the story, welcome, and make sure to subscribe to the channel, Echoes of Nightmares, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on any of the future scary tales. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button too. Now, back to my story. Some say in this town that shadows have a life of their own on nights like these, that they gather at the edges of your vision, pooling under streetlights, spilling into doorways, stretching just a little longer than they should. They say that when the rain falls this way, old secrets stir, secrets buried deep and left untouched, as if time itself had done its best to swallow them whole. But time has a funny way of playing tricks. I didn't come to this place looking for stories. No, I was only passing through. I hadn't planned to stop here at all. And yet, the moment I set foot in this town, something made me linger. Maybe it was the feeling of stepping into a place that had barely changed while the rest of the world rushed forward. It was as if this town had slipped out of reach, left to age in silence, with memories tucked away in old houses and empty streets. At first, it was just a curiosity, an odd feeling I couldn't quite place. A sense of being watched, maybe, or of something waiting just out of sight. People here seemed polite enough, but there was a distance in their eyes, a look that shifted the moment they thought I wasn't looking. They didn't ask many questions. They didn't offer much either. But sometimes, in hushed tones, I catch whispers of something that happened here years ago. No one wanted to speak of it directly. It was more in the way they'd glance over their shoulder, or in the quiet way their voices would fade off, as if mentioning it might somehow bring it all rushing back. I'd hear fragments, words dropped here and there, but they always felt incomplete. There was talk of someone, or maybe more than one, who disappeared on a night just like this, gone without a trace. And that was all really, just a whisper buried under the rain, fading before it could fully reach my ears. But the rain has a way of drawing things out, of uncovering what might otherwise stay hidden. And as the hours dragged on, with the rain growing louder, something gnawed at me. A quiet urge, an unsettling need to know more. As I walked through the town that night, the rain soaking through my coat, I could feel how this place had once been something more, a bustling center perhaps in another time. But now it seemed like a ghost of itself. The storefronts were dim, windows clouded and streaked, with signs faded from years of neglect. Only a handful of lights flickered in the windows of homes that sat close to the road. Most places were dark, save for the occasional lamppost casting pale yellow light, glistening against the wet streets, stretching shadows across cracked sidewalks. The town had a way of feeling hollow, the kind of quiet that eats up sound, that muffles your steps and makes you feel like even your thoughts are unwelcome here. I caught myself looking over my shoulder more than once, though the streets were empty. Just the rain, steady and cold, and the soft drip of water from awnings that had long since started to sag under the weight of it all. It wasn't long before I began to understand what the people here might have been hiding. There was a tension in the air, like something that lay just beneath the surface, silent and watchful. I'd see people glance outside as they passed by their windows, their faces half hidden in the dim light, their expressions unreadable. They'd watch me for a moment, then retreat, curtains slipping shut as if to say, "You're on your own here." I remembered the whispers I'd overheard, the fragments of conversation I'd pieced together. There was a story in this town, one that people avoided speaking of, but couldn't quite escape. It had happened years ago, they'd say, though no one seemed sure exactly when. A family, or maybe just a child, had gone missing one stormy night, swallowed up by the rain and never seen again. They left behind nothing, no trace, as if they'd simply slipped away into the dark, taken by something waiting just beyond the light. The strange part was, no one seemed willing to offer details. When I asked an old man sitting outside the local shop, he only shook his head, muttering something about things best left in the past. But I saw the way his hands shook, how his eyes darted to the window as if expecting to see something lurking there. There was a particular night they'd talk about, always that night, the night the family vanished. It was storming, just like tonight, they'd say. The rain had been heavy, relentless, beating down on the roofs until it drowned out every other sound. And in the midst of it, people had heard cries, faint, distant cries that drifted through the storm, mixed with the wind, slipping in and out like the rain itself. And then there were the shadows. The people here didn't need to explain. I could tell by the look in their eyes that they'd seen things they couldn't explain. They'd speak of shadows that moved when they shouldn't, shapes that seemed to stretch out across the rain-slicked streets, disappearing the moment they tried to look closer. Shadows that clung to the edges of sight, never quite there, but never quite gone either. One woman, who I'd seen only once, as she crossed the road in a hurry, glanced at me as if deciding whether to speak. In a low voice, she whispered, "There are things here, things you don't want to see, things that come out when the rain falls like this." She said nothing more, but her words lingered with me, pressing against my thoughts like a weight. I walked on, feeling the rain grow heavier around me, each drop tapping against my shoulders, my head. The silence of the town seemed to thicken, broken only by my own footsteps echoing against the damp pavement. I could almost feel something watching me from the shadows, some presence lingering just beyond my sight. It was then I noticed something odd, a faint sound, almost lost in the rain, like footsteps matching my own but somehow slower, deliberate. I stopped listening. For a moment, there was nothing but the rain, falling in sheets around me. But then, there it was again, softer this time, as if it was slipping away, retreating into the darkness. I turned back, half expecting to see someone there, but the street was empty. Just the abandoned buildings, the darkened windows, and the occasional rustle of leaves as the wind picked up. The footsteps faded, slipping into the background noise of the storm, leaving only that sense of something lingering. I moved to this town not long ago, hoping to find a little peace. I'd spent years surrounded by the noise and rush of the city, and I wanted something quieter, slower. A place where I could clear my head and maybe start over. When I first arrived, the rain was just starting to fall. Lightly then, nothing more than a drizzle. The kind of rain that feels refreshing, that settles over everything like a thin mist. I'd always been a skeptic. Ghost stories, superstitions, they never interested me much. If anything, they seemed like relics of another time, something people told themselves to make life feel more exciting or to explain things they didn't understand. So, when I heard the rumors about this town, about shadows that moved on their own or voices that drifted through the rain, I brushed it off as small-town folklore. I wasn't here for stories. I was here to get away from all that, to start fresh. The house I rented was old, though sturdy. It had stood for decades, maybe longer, and it showed. The floors groaned with every step. The walls were thick with layers of faded paint, and the windows were cloudy, their frames warped slightly from years of wet seasons and neglect. But there was a charm to it, a coziness. It was quiet and secluded, set back from the road with trees lining the edge of the property, their branches hanging low and thick, like something out of an old photograph. For the first few nights, things were calm. The rain came and went, the town stayed silent, and I settled into the routine of my new life, feeling the weight of my old one slowly lift. But then, on the third night, as the rain returned with a steady rhythm, something strange happened. It was late, well past midnight, and I was reading in bed, lulled by the sound of the rain. But then I heard it, just outside my window, barely loud enough to catch my attention. A soft whisper, almost inaudible, like someone murmuring just beyond the glass. I told myself it was nothing, probably just the wind or the way the rain caught on the leaves. But then it came again, a little louder this time, almost a word, though I couldn't make it out. I sat up, my eyes fixed on the window. The room was dark, shadows pooling in the corners, broken only by the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the rain. I waited, straining to hear, and for a moment, silence. Just the rain, steady and unbroken. But then there was again a sound barely more than a breath. A voice. I kept telling myself it was just the rain, that the isolation was getting to me, that maybe I was just tired hearing things that weren't there. But deep down, I knew something was off. I could feel it, a tension just beyond my understanding, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. The sound continued, faint and irregular, like someone moving outside. And then footsteps, light, careful, barely more than a shuffle, but unmistakable. They stopped the moment I stood up, as if whatever, or whoever, was out there knew I'd heard them. I crossed the room slowly, trying not to make a sound, my pulse pounding in my ears. I reached the window, peering out into the rain, my eyes scanning the yard and the shadows cast by the trees. Nothing, just the empty street and the wet pavement gleaming under the light, shadows shifting with the breeze, moving like they had a mind of their own. I went back to bed, tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was all in my head. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel that presence lingering just outside, watching. I must have drifted off eventually, because when I woke, the rain had stopped and the house was silent once more. But as the days passed, the strangeness only grew. Every night, as the rain returned, so did the sounds. Footsteps, faint whispers, shadows shifting outside my window. Gone the moment I tried to look closer. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination, but each night it crept a little closer, that feeling of something waiting, something unseen but not unfelt. One night, I tried to ignore it, to sleep through the sounds, hoping that if I didn't give it my attention, it would stop. But the more I tried to ignore it, the louder it became. The footsteps grew closer, the whispers more insistent, as if they were calling to me, demanding that I listen. And so, night after night, I'd find myself sitting up in bed, my eyes fixed on the window, waiting, listening to the sounds that had started to feel purposeful, deliberate, as if something or someone was testing the boundaries, waiting for me to notice. The days passed, but the nights felt longer, heavier, as if the air itself thickened around me once the sun went down. It was subtle at first, easy to overlook, a strange feeling here, a misplaced item there. But slowly, steadily, these oddities started to grow, each one building on the last until the house itself felt different, like it was no longer my own. It began one morning when I noticed a small picture frame on the shelf, tilted ever so slightly. Nothing unusual, I told myself. Perhaps I'd brushed it by accident, or maybe the house had shifted just enough to disturb it. But the next night, as the rain poured down and the shadows deepened, I found the same frame not just tilted, but turned completely around, facing the wall. I stared at it, unease gnawing at me, but shook it off as best I could. It was just a frame after all, just a bit of wood and glass. But the next night, as I stepped into the hallway, I felt an odd sensation, like a chill moving down my spine. I looked down and froze. There, leading up to my door, were faint, wet footprints, small, like those of a child, half faded, as though the rain itself had tried to wash them away. I looked around, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me. But there was no one, just the faint scent of damp wood and old rain drifting through the hallway, and the scratches of branches against the windows, tapping as if they too were trying to get my attention. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, a constant weight pressing against my thoughts, creeping into the edges of every room, every shadow. The air felt colder now, even during the day. No matter how high I turned the heat, there was always a chill lingering in the rooms, especially near the windows. It smelled old, damp, like wood that had soaked up years of rain and never dried. And there was this quiet, just beneath the rain and the wind, a quiet that seemed almost alive, waiting, holding its breath. The whispers returned too, only this time they were clearer. Not words exactly, but sounds, murmurs that curled around the edges of silence, drifting through the house like a memory forgotten but not gone. Every time I heard them, they stopped the moment I moved closer, slipping away like shadows fading into the dark. But each time, they seemed a little louder, a little closer. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that it was just the storm or the sounds of an old house settling. But deep down, I knew it was something else, something watching. Sometimes, when the wind would howl through the trees, I'd catch myself glancing toward the windows, half expecting to see something looking back, hiding just behind the glass, waiting for me to notice. And then, one night, as the rain fell harder than ever, I decided to test it. I set an old chair near the front door, positioned just so that if it moved, I'd know. And I waited, lying in bed, listening to the rain, the scratches of branches against the house, the faint, ghostly sounds that seemed to fill the air like whispers. I lay there for hours, watching the shadows stretch and shift, listening to the wind as it moaned through the trees. It must have been well past midnight when I heard it, a soft, dragging sound like something heavy scraping against the floor. I sat up, heart pounding, listening as the sound grew closer, echoing down the hallway, moving toward the door. And then silence. I waited, breath held, every nerve on edge, straining to hear anything, any sound that might tell me I wasn't alone. But there was nothing, only the rain and the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath me. The next morning I found the chair moved, not far, just an inch or two, but enough to know that I hadn't imagined it. Someone or something had been there. I stared at it, feeling the weight of that presence settle over me like a cold hand on my shoulder, and I couldn't help but wonder, what would you do if you knew someone or something was watching you from the shadows? If every time you closed your eyes, you could feel it drawing nearer, slipping out from the dark, waiting for you to let your guard down? I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was getting bolder. Each night, it came a little closer, leaving traces, a misplaced object, a cold draft, the faint smell of damp earth drifting through the rooms. And with each passing night, that strange, suffocating quiet seemed to deepen, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. The whispers, the shadows, the feeling of something watching, it had become a part of my nights now, woven into the fabric of the house, creeping into my thoughts even in daylight. And as the storm grew stronger, as the rain beat down harder, I could feel it waiting, just out of sight, lingering in the shadows, drawing closer with every breath I took. The tension in the house was thick, like a damp fog I couldn't shake. Every night, the strange sensations grew stronger, more insistent. I'd catch glimpses of shadows out of the corner of my eye, flickering just on the edge of the light, like they were watching and waiting. The whispers in the darkness seemed to take shape, forming sounds that felt almost like words, though I couldn't quite make them out. And every night, the rain seemed louder, as if it was trying to drown out something it didn't want me to hear. I needed answers. I thought maybe I was losing my mind, that the isolation had gotten to me, or that the tales the townsfolk told had somehow wormed their way into my thoughts, filling the silence with imagined horrors. But then I found something that shifted everything, something that would make anyone question what was real and what was imagined. One morning, as I was cleaning out the basement, dusty, cluttered, filled with old, forgotten objects, I came across a small, yellowed envelope tucked beneath a broken crate. Inside was a newspaper clipping, fragile with age, the ink faded but still readable. The headline sent a chill through me, as though the air itself had turned cold. Family disappears without a trace. It read, dated nearly 50 years ago. A mother, father, and their young daughter, last seen on a rainy night just like the one I was living through. According to the article, they had lived in this very house. And on a stormy night just like this, they had vanished, leaving behind nothing but rumors and questions that the town had buried over the years. I asked around town about it the next day, hoping someone might remember, hoping to find some sense of normalcy in an explanation. But every time I mentioned it, the townsfolk grew tense, their faces darkening, their gazes shifting away. They avoided my eyes, offered vague, muttered responses, and quickly made their excuses, retreating into silence. One old man, however, said something that lingered with me, something that followed me back to the house and settled in the corners of my mind. "Some things are best left alone," he muttered, glancing over his shoulder as if afraid to be overheard. "This town has secrets that the rain tries to wash away, but sometimes those secrets find their way back." That night, as the rain poured down, I felt something different. A heaviness in the air, a charge that seemed to thrum through the walls and the floor. And as I sat in the dim light, the whispers grew louder, like voices pressing against my ears. I caught myself glancing toward the corners, where the shadows seemed darker, deeper, as if something was crouched within them, waiting. It was then that I noticed it, a strange mark on the floor near the door, faint but unmistakable, etched into the wood like a scar. It was a symbol, crude and unfamiliar, almost primitive, like something from an ancient text. I stared at it, my mind racing, the room feeling colder by the second. Then, just as suddenly, the lights began to flicker. I felt my heart pounding as I scanned the room, my pulse racing with a fear I couldn't explain. Every corner seemed darker. Every shadow seemed to stretch a little closer. And in the dim, pulsing light, I saw them, shapes shifting just out of reach, figures moving in the corners of my vision. I turned, trying to catch them in the light, but they were gone the moment I looked directly. Yet, I could feel them, an unsettling presence, like the air itself had come alive, breathing, watching, waiting. The symbols, the flickering lights, the whispers, they all seemed connected, woven together by some invisible thread that I couldn't untangle. My breathing was shallow, my chest tight, every instinct telling me to leave, to get out, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring at the flickering lights, the strange symbols, the shadows that seemed to reach out like hands. And then, I heard it. The tapping on the window grew louder, insistent, as if something wanted in. And in the rhythm of the rain, I could swear I heard a voice. Not a whisper this time, but a voice, low and distorted, like it had traveled through miles of rain to reach me. I felt a chill race down my spine, my eyes fixed on the window. The glass was fogged, streaked with rain, but through the haze, I could just make out a shape, a faint outline of something. standing outside in the darkness, barely visible, but undeniably there. It was as if the rain itself had taken form, a shadow cast from the storm, watching me, waiting for me to notice. I stepped back, my pulse racing, my mind screaming for me to look away, to close the blinds, to turn off the lights, to do anything but stand there, staring. But I couldn't move. I was transfixed, caught in the gaze of whatever lingered beyond the glass, its form shifting with the rain, merging with the shadows, as if it was part of them, as if it had always been there. My mind raced with questions, my heart pounding with a fear that felt ancient, primal, as though it had been buried in the walls of this house long before I'd ever set foot inside. The symbols, the whispers, the shadows, it all felt like a puzzle, a warning etched into the bones of the house itself. And as I stood there, caught in the gaze of that shadow, I felt something click, something that filled me with a dread I couldn't shake. This wasn't just a haunting. This was something older, something that belonged to the house, to the town, something that the rain couldn't wash away. What would you do if you saw something like that? If you knew there was something watching, something just beyond the glass, waiting for you to look away, waiting for you to let your guard down? I didn't know why I felt the urge to go out that night, why the storm seemed to call me from the safety of my home. I'd been on edge, feeling watched and hunted, like every shadow held a secret, and every whisper was meant for me alone. But as I sat, listening to the relentless downpour, I felt something shift inside me, a strange, magnetic pull that I couldn't resist. I didn't even realize I'd left the house until I was standing outside, rain pouring down, soaking me to the bone. My feet moved almost of their own accord, leading me past the edge of town, down an old, narrow path that twisted through the trees. The darkness swallowed me, the rain muffling every sound, isolating me in a world of shadows and echoing memories. I found myself at the outskirts of an old, abandoned building, one I'd never seen before. Its roof sagged, and vines snaked up the crumbling walls, blending it into the forest as though it had grown there like a twisted tree. The building loomed before me, silent and ominous, as if it was waiting, as if it had been waiting for years. Without a thought, I stepped inside. The air was thick with a damp, decaying smell that filled my lungs with each breath, and every corner seemed cloaked in a deeper darkness, hiding secrets that didn't want to be disturbed. As I ventured further inside, my footsteps echoed softly, swallowed by the vast, empty silence. The walls were lined with peeling wallpaper, and the floorboards creaked beneath me, each step feeling like a descent into something forbidden. Then I saw them, small, scattered remnants, items forgotten and left behind as though frozen in time. A child's toy, worn and faded, an old, tattered book with torn pages, and a cracked photograph, its faces blurred by age but unmistakably familiar. It was the family, the mother, the father, the child. Their eyes seemed to follow me, hollow and accusing, as if asking why I was there, why I had disturbed the stillness. A chill ran down my spine. The rain grew louder, hammering against the roof, almost deafening now, as if trying to drown out the voices that seemed to echo in the darkness around me. Shadows shifted at the edge of my vision, darting in and out, moving closer with every step I took. And then I heard it, a low, guttural sound, like a growl, reverberating through the silence. My heart pounded as I spun around, scanning the empty room, every instinct screaming that I wasn't alone. Doors creaked softly, closing off my escape routes, trapping me in the darkness, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, a fear that gripped me so tightly I could barely breathe. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The humming grew louder, filling the empty space around me. merging with the rain until it was all I could hear. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. Whatever was here had been waiting, lurking in the shadows, watching as I stumbled into its grasp. And now it was closing in. I backed away, my eyes darting around the room, my heart pounding as I searched for a way out. But every door was shut, every window darkened, and the walls felt as though they were closing in on me, trapping me in a space I didn't belong. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A shape, barely visible in the dim light, standing in the doorway. It was tall, shrouded in shadows, its form shifting like smoke, blending into the darkness. And as I stared, frozen in terror, I realized it was watching me, its eyes glinting in the faint light, filled with a malevolent awareness. I stumbled backward, my hands searching blindly for anything to defend myself with. But the figure didn't move, didn't advance. It just stood there, blocking the only way out, as if savoring the fear that pulsed through me, feeding on the panic that filled the room. And then it spoke, a voice, deep and distorted, barely more than a whisper, yet it cut through the noise, filling the room with its chilling presence. "You don't belong?" The words echoed in my mind, twisting through my thoughts like a poison, sinking into my bones. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was trapped, held captive by that gaze, paralyzed by a fear that went beyond reason. I was alone, surrounded by shadows, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the scent of decay and the faint, lingering sound of that haunting laughter. And as the darkness closed around me, I felt something brush against my shoulder, a cold, weightless touch that sent a shiver down my spine, a touch that wasn't human, that carried with it the chill of something ancient. What would you do if you felt that touch? If you knew you were not alone? If you felt the eyes of something unseen watching, waiting for you to make the first move? In a frenzy, I stumbled backward, my heart racing as I reached blindly for the door. The figure still stood there, an unmoving shadow blocking my escape, but I was desperate. With a burst of strength, I lunged for the door, shoving it open and darting out into the night. Cold rain poured over me, blurring my vision as I ran, each step splashing through puddles, the wind howling like a warning in my ears. I didn't look back, I couldn't. The terror that gripped me was too great, the fear that something was just inches behind, reaching out, closing in. My breath came in gasps, my body moving as though by instinct, propelling me forward even as the rain grew heavier, the darkness closing in from all sides. When I finally reached the safety of my house, I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut behind me, pressing my back against it as I fought to catch my breath. The room was dark and silent, save for the steady drip of rainwater from my clothes pooling at my feet. I felt a strange, hollow relief, as though I'd narrowly escaped. But escaped what? Was it my own imagination? Some trick of the shadows, brought to life by the stories I'd heard? I tried to shake the thoughts away, to convince myself it was nothing more than an overactive mind. But as I stood there, alone in the quiet darkness, a chill washed over me. I walked slowly to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked town, at the shadows shifting in the distance. And then, in a flash of lightning, I caught a glimpse of myself reflected in the glass, or so I thought. For there, standing just behind my shoulder, was a figure, a dark, indistinct shape, its face obscured but unmistakably watching me. I spun around, heart hammering, but the room was empty. Or was it, "Don't belong"? The words drifted through the silence, a chilling reminder that I hadn't escaped at all. I stumbled back from the window, my eyes darting to every corner, every shadow, expecting that figure to emerge from the darkness. I tried to calm myself to believe it was over. But as I sat there, the whispers seemed to grow louder, merging with the rhythm of the rain, as if calling me back, as if urging me to return. The next morning, I woke in a daze, the memory of the previous night vivid and haunting. I wanted to believe it was all a dream, a trick of the storm and my own fears. But as I glanced out the window, my gaze caught something, footprints leading from the woods, stopping right outside my door. My heart skipped. They weren't mine. And as I watched those footprints, the faint memory of that whisper lingered in my mind. The feeling that something had followed me back, that I was never alone in the first place. That perhaps it was waiting just outside for the rain to fall again. What do you think really happened that night? Was it just a story, or is there something waiting out there in the rain? Perhaps next time the storm comes, you'll take a closer look, because sometimes the shadows are closer than they appear. Some stories cling to places, lingering in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And sometimes they choose us, whether we want them to or not. Maybe it's a warning, a reminder that there are things in this world we can't see, but they see us. Tell me, have you ever felt it? A presence when you're alone, a shadow that just doesn't belong? Maybe it's nothing, or maybe it's waiting for the rain. If this story left you looking over your shoulder, share your thoughts below. Do you believe in places that hold memories, that wait in silence for someone to stumble upon them? And if you've ever had an experience of your own, one that left you questioning what's real, tell us. Sometimes, sharing our fears is the only way to keep them at bay. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you dare to join us for more tales that creep into the shadows and linger long after the lights go out.